Nobody wanted him, not the families that came by, not the volunteers, not even the shelter staff. He was just there, silent, broken, forgotten. But then, a little child walked and looked at that dog and said something that stopped everyone cold. This isn't just another story about a dog in a shelter. This is about how one small voice saw what hundreds ignored, and how that voice changed a life, maybe even saved it. If you've ever believed in second chances, this story is going to hit you right in the heart. They called him Rusty, not because of his fur or some cute backstory. No, it was just the name scribbled on the intake form the day he was dropped off at the vet clinic. A name he didn't even recognize anymore. A name whispered by strangers, not the family that once called him theirs. Rusty was a German Shepherd mix, probably 3 or 4 years old. Strong once, proud once. A dog that probably used to chase balls, run through fields, guard his home with loyalty in his chest. But all that was gone now. It started with a car, a screech, a yelp, then silence. They found him in a ditch, barely breathing. His leg was shattered, pelvis cracked. The people who brought him in said he was hit while chasing after a kid on a scooter. His own kid, maybe. No one could say for sure. But what everyone remembered was what happened after. His family just left. When the vet delivered the news that Rusty would never run again, that he might walk with a limp for the rest of his life, they didn't even ask questions. They nodded, paid the bill for the x-ray, and left without looking back. The techs waited all day, thinking someone would return. They didn't. A day turned into 2. 2 turned into a week. Then the vet called the shelter. Rusty wasn't anyone's problem anymore. At the shelter, they gave him a space in the back, clean towels, a soft bed, even a donated orthopedic mat to help with the pain. But Rusty just stared at the wall. He didn't cry, didn't bark, didn't even flinch when people walked by. It was like his soul had been locked inside his body, and he was just waiting for someone to turn the key, or to forget him completely. And people did forget him. They came in, arms full of hope, looking for a forever friend. Kids dragged parents toward the kennels, calling out names, giggling at wagging tails. Puppies bounced at the gates. Even older dogs had a charm about them. But when they reached Rusty's pen, the energy shifted. Oh, what happened to him? Is he okay? He looks sad. Shelter staff tried to explain. He was hit by a car. He's still recovering. He's quiet but sweet. But those words didn't sell. People wanted dogs who played fetch, not ones who barely moved. They wanted energy, excitement, a tail that wagged when they walked in. Rusty just blinked. Weeks passed, then months. Volunteers tried everything. They fed him by hand, took him on slow walks. One even played violin for him, soft music that floated through the kennel at night. Some days, he lifted his head. Most days, he didn't. And yet, he was never aggressive, never snapped, never growled. He just waited. It's strange, watching a creature slowly lose hope. It doesn't happen all at once. It's in the little things. How their eyes follow you less. How their ears stop twitching at noise. How they sleep longer, eat slower, move less. Rusty was still breathing, but it was like he wasn't living anymore. Then came the meeting. Shelters don't talk about it openly, but every facility has one eventually. When space runs low, when new intakes are lined up and kennels are full, hard choices are made. Dogs are assessed, not for who they are, but for what their odds are. And Rusty, he didn't pass that test. Unadoptable, unresponsive, no progress in months. Someone finally said it. It might be time. Nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to admit it. But the truth was loud and heavy. The shelter director stood in the center of the room, holding Rusty's file like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And that silence, that hesitation, was enough to start the countdown. That week, something changed. Rusty didn't touch his food, not even the chicken treats he used to sniff at. He didn't lift his head when his favorite volunteer came in. He didn't move when his kennel was cleaned. It was like he knew, like somehow, the weight of everyone's whispers had seeped through the walls and into his bones. That quiet corner of the shelter became a graveyard of hope. Staff would pass by, glance inside, and feel that familiar tug in their chest, the one that said, he deserves more. But deserving didn't always mean saving. Then came the day the weather changed. Rain hammered the tin roof of the shelter. The wind howled like it was mourning something. Thunder rolled across the sky, loud enough to make every dog bark except Rusty. He didn't flinch. The shelter lights flickered, and the volunteers huddled in the break room, waiting for the storm to pass. A few new dogs had come in that morning, and every pen was full. They knew what that meant. The air was thick with unspoken words. One volunteer, a college student named Jenna, sat staring at Rusty's file. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced his name on the cover. "We're running out of time," she whispered to no one. That night, Jenna stayed late. She pulled a chair outside Rusty's kennel and just sat there. No talking, no treats, just quiet. After an hour, she stood, about to leave, but paused, then did something she hadn't done before. She opened the kennel door. No leash, no commands, just an open space. Rusty looked at her, then looked away. But after a few minutes, he stood, wobbly, slow. He limped out, one leg dragging just slightly behind him. His eyes didn't meet hers, but his body did something it hadn't done in months. He leaned, just slightly, against her shin, like he was saying, "I'm still here. Barely, but I'm still here." Jenna knelt down, pressing her forehead gently against his. "You matter, Rusty," she whispered. "I promise. You still matter." The next morning, the shelter director added Rusty to the list. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. The waiting list was full. The donations were low. And the reality of shelter work is this. For every Rusty, there are 10 more waiting to come in. But Jenna couldn't let it happen. She made calls, posted pictures, wrote paragraphs on Facebook. She begged people to see what she saw. But the likes came, not the calls. And then something unexpected. One afternoon, a woman walked in with a child. The boy was small, maybe 6 or 7. He had thick glasses, a quiet stare, and a book in his hand, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. They didn't ask to see the puppies, didn't want a tour. The boy just looked at the front desk and said, "I want to see the dog that's too sad." Everyone froze. No one had used those words before, but they all knew exactly who he meant. That's where the problem stood. Rusty, this broken dog, abandoned and forgotten, had run out of time. The world had moved on without him. Hope was a fading ember, and now the decision loomed. The shelter couldn't wait much longer. The volunteers were heartbroken, and the boy, well, he hadn't even seen Rusty yet. Would this kid see what no one else did? Would one quiet voice be enough to stop what had already begun? That was the challenge. Not just saving Rusty, but making someone believe he was still worth saving. And time was almost up. Rusty's days began and ended the same way. Wake up to the echo of barking from other dogs. Lay down, listen to the footsteps of visitors passing his kennel without a glance. Then night would fall, and the lights would dim, and Rusty would still be lying in the same corner, as if he didn't even know time was passing. There was something haunting about the way he didn't react. A dog not begging for treats, not jumping up at the bars, not even turning his head when someone called his name. And that was what made it worse, because people notice energy. They stop when a dog wags its tail or barks excitedly. They pause when a dog looks at them with those "please take me home" eyes. But Rusty had none of that left. He was a ghost in a kennel. Some of the volunteers said he wasn't the same dog he used to be, that when he first arrived, there was still a spark in him. He tried to stand, even though his back leg trembled. He nudged people's hands. He even barked once, softly, but it was there. But when no one came for him week after week, that spark just faded. You could literally see the moment he gave up. It was after a family came in looking for a German Shepherd, good with kids, and active. They looked at Rusty for less than 2 seconds. The dad said, "Oh no, he's limping." The mom didn't even say anything. She turned away. And their kid, he pointed at a puppy and said, "Can we take that one?" They left happy, laughing and smiling with a new leash in hand. And Rusty, he didn't even lift his head. That's when staff began talking behind closed doors. They tried to whisper, but shelters have thin walls, and word spread faster than anyone wants to admit. Rusty's not eating again. It's been 8 months. He hasn't had a single meet and greet. It started as concern, but it slowly turned into something colder, practical. He's taking up a kennel we could use for a dog with a chance. And that's the harsh truth of shelters that no one likes to admit. There's love, yes. There's hope and compassion and rescue stories that melt your heart. But behind it all is math, numbers, space. And space was running out. That week, 3 litters came in, 12 tiny puppies, all hungry and scared, rescued from a roadside ditch. There was nowhere to put them, and someone said it, quietly, but it changed everything. We may need to make room. Every kennel in the shelter had a small clipboard on the door. Basic info, name, age, behavior notes. And then there was the red mark, a small red sticker placed on the corner of a kennel card. It wasn't announced. It wasn't official policy. But everyone who worked there knew what it meant. It meant time was almost up. It meant last chance. That Friday morning, when the volunteers arrived, someone noticed it. A single red dot on Rusty's kennel. No one said a word. but the air felt different that day. Heavy, like everyone was holding their breath and avoiding eye contact. Even the most hardened volunteer, the one who'd seen dozens of dogs come and go, stood in front of Rusty's kennel just a second longer. She didn't say anything, just slid a small piece of leftover chicken through the bars. Rusty sniffed it once, then looked away. You might think dogs don't understand what's going on, that they don't feel grief or fear in the same way we do. But ask anyone who's worked in a shelter long enough. They'll tell you, some dogs know. They feel it. Rusty started sleeping more, not because he was tired, but because it hurt less to dream than to stay awake in a world that had forgotten him. The limp in his leg had gotten worse, but it wasn't what made him immobile. It was something deeper, something that no vet could fix, no medicine could treat. He was broken in spirit, and no one knew how to reach him anymore. One of the shelter assistants even sat with him for nearly an hour one day, just petting his head, whispering stories from her childhood. She cried when she left. She didn't say why, but we all knew, because Rusty had become the dog everyone loved, but no one could help. Saturday afternoon, the director called a meeting. Staff, volunteers, everyone who worked the floor. She didn't mince words. We're full. We've got more animals coming in Monday. We've reached out to every partner shelter and foster. We're out of options. So unless we get an adoption by Sunday night, some very hard decisions have to be made. No one said Rusty's name, but they didn't have to. Everyone thought it. He was the longest resident, the least active, the least desirable by typical standards, and the only one with a red sticker. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the shelter walls in gold, a young volunteer named Mia knelt beside Rusty's kennel. She had a habit of taking photos of the dogs at sunset, said it made them look less scared, more beautiful. She pointed her phone through the bars and whispered, "Come on, Rusty, just one smile." Nothing. She sighed, but didn't give up. She sat there for a full hour, humming quietly, holding out a biscuit she knew he wouldn't take, just being there. At one point, just before she left, Rusty lifted his eyes. Not his head, just his eyes. And for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker. Tiny, almost invisible, but it was there. The shelter opened late on Sundays, but Mia arrived early. She wasn't scheduled, didn't have to be there, but something kept tugging at her heart all night. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All she kept seeing was Rusty's eyes. That flicker, that tiny, almost invisible spark, it haunted her. She brought a blanket from home, soft, blue, and warm, the kind you wrap yourself in on days when the world feels too big. She slipped it into Rusty's kennel and whispered, "I don't know if you care, but I do." Rusty didn't move, but when she left, someone watching from a distance swore they saw him shift his paw, just slightly, toward the blanket. It was the kind of thing that didn't make sense unless you wanted to believe. And Mia did. The hours passed like slow-moving shadows. Dogs were walked, puppies were adopted, papers were filed, phone calls were made, but no one came for Rusty. His name wasn't on any adoption hold. No meet and greets, not even an inquiry. Every time the bell above the door rang, the staff held their breath, only to let it out again when the visitor said, "We're looking for something young, playful." The director checked her watch more than once. A red folder sat on her desk, thick, cold, and heavy. Inside were the names of the unadopted, the forgotten, the ones no longer deemed viable. Rusty's name was second on the list. That afternoon, as clouds rolled in and the sky darkened, a woman walked into the shelter. She was quiet, small frame, wore a long beige coat and a scarf that looked handmade. Beside her, holding her hand, was a little boy, maybe 6, maybe 7. He had wide brown eyes and one of those backpacks with cartoon dinosaurs on it. He didn't say a word, just looked around slowly as if searching. "Can we help you?" asked a front desk volunteer. The woman hesitated. "My son, he wants to meet one dog. He saw a picture on the shelter's website, a big dog, brown with a limp. I think his name was Rusty." Everything stopped. The air, the sound, even the staff member at the desk blinked slowly, as if trying to make sure she heard it right. "Rusty?" she echoed. The boy nodded. They were led down the corridor, past barking cages, past bouncing tails and wagging tongues. But the boy didn't react to any of them. He walked straight, focused, like he already knew where he was going. When they reached Rusty's kennel, he stopped, didn't say anything, just stood there staring. Rusty didn't move, didn't lift his head, didn't wag, just like always. But the boy knelt down and, without a word, placed a small hand against the bars. Rusty didn't flinch, didn't growl, didn't move away. And then, slowly, cautiously, he leaned forward and pressed his nose against the boy's hand. It was so quiet, you could hear the wind outside, The boy turned to his mother and whispered, "That's the one. He's the one I want." The adoption counselor gently cleared her throat. "Honey," she began softly, "Rusty's older. He's been through a lot. He's not like other dogs. He may never run or play fetch. He might not live very long." The boy blinked. "I know," he said. The mother looked down, her eyes wet. "We lost his older brother last year," she said. "He was in a wheelchair, couldn't walk. But my son says Rusty has the same eyes." No one knew what to say, because how do you explain to a child that a dog no one wanted might be exactly the soul he needs? The counselor said, "You can think about it. Maybe come back tomorrow." But the boy cut her off, gently. "No," he said. "If he's going to be put down today, I want to be the one to stop it." That sentence hit the room like a thunderclap. One of the kennel staff quietly stepped away, her hand over her mouth. The director was called in. She looked at the boy, then at Rusty, and then at the clipboard on the kennel door. The red sticker. She pulled it off. No words, no speech, just peeled it off and slipped it into her pocket. Then she knelt and looked Rusty in the eyes. "Looks like someone finally sees you," she whispered. And for the first time since he arrived, Rusty's tail moved. Just once, but it moved. The adoption took time. Papers were signed. Warnings were given. He might not make it through the year. One staffer said gently. The boy nodded again. "I just want him to know what it feels like to be wanted," he said. "Even if it's just for a little while." That single sentence was enough to make every heart in that building break open. And when they left that day, the boy holding the leash, Rusty walking slow but steady beside him, it felt like the whole world got a little quieter, a little better. 3 days later, the shelter buzzed with energy. It was the kind of day built to bring hope. An open house, colorful banners, booths with balloons tied to each corner, excited kids with painted whiskers pretending to be kittens, dogs barking excitedly, and the sound of pop music faintly playing through some portable speaker. Volunteers moved with purpose, holding leashes, handing out flyers, guiding families from one kennel to another. This was the day many animals waited for. A fresh chance, a new face that might stop and say, "Yes, you're the one." But not Rusty. Rusty wasn't in the colorful parts. He wasn't in a booth or out on the lawn. He wasn't even listed on the pamphlet. His name had been quietly excluded, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't want to get hopes up. Not his, not theirs, not the visitors. The back hallway was dimmer than the rest of the building. Quiet, almost like the air knew this was the place hope had grown tired. And in that space, behind an aging metal gate, Rusty lay curled up, one paw tucked under him awkwardly, the other slightly trembling as he dozed. He didn't know it was an adoption day. He didn't care. The world outside had forgotten him a long time ago, and honestly, he had started to forget it back. But just past noon, something shifted. It started with the soft patter of small sneakers and the creak of a door that was supposed to be closed. Lila had wandered off, not out of mischief, but curiosity. She wasn't like the other kids who ran from pen to pen squealing with excitement. She hadn't pulled on her parents' hands or shouted "Look" 100 times. She just observed, quietly, sweetly, a small girl with a frayed ponytail, holding a worn-out stuffed dog that clearly had its own story. She paused at every kennel, whispering to the animals inside like they were old friends. She didn't point or laugh. She didn't flinch when a bigger dog barked. She just smiled and kept moving until she saw the door, slightly open. Maybe no one else would have noticed, but she did, and without thinking twice, Lila slipped inside. The hallway felt cooler, the light dimmer, but she wasn't scared. She clutched her stuffed dog closer and tiptoed past stacked storage bins and crates until her eyes found the kennel in the back. And there he was, Rusty. Lila stopped. He looked like something out of a bedtime story, not the magical kind, but the kind where a brave knight finds an old, forgotten creature and sees the magic no one else does. She walked slowly to the bars and lowered herself to the floor, knees crisscrossed, her eyes locked on Rusty's still body. "Hi," she whispered. No movement. He didn't look at her, didn't sniff the air, didn't raise an ear. Still she stayed. Minutes ticked by. She started humming, soft and sweet, some made-up lullaby she probably sang to her stuffed dog at night. Then she started talking, not loudly, just like you'd talk to someone who needed gentleness more than anything. "I know you're tired," she said. "I get tired too sometimes." Rusty didn't flinch, but his ears moved. Barely. She smiled. Back out front, a volunteer noticed the empty hallway door and her heart skipped. She started toward it, just as Lila's mother turned a corner, calling her name. But by the time they reached the door, Lila was already sitting there, completely still. eyes locked on Rusty like he was the only one that mattered. "Sweetheart," her mom whispered, kneeling beside her. "We can look at other dogs, okay? This one's not. He's not for adoption." Lila didn't budge, didn't even blink. She looked up, not with rebellion, but with heartbreak. Why does no one want him? The question landed like a weight in the room. The volunteer shifted uncomfortably. "He's not well. He had an accident. He doesn't play like the others, honey. He doesn't really respond to people. But he's still here," Lila said softly. "He's still trying." Her mom exhaled slowly. "He's broken, sweetie. He's old. He can't walk properly anymore." Lila looked at her mom and said something that no one expected. "If nobody wants him, does that mean he has to die?" The room froze. The volunteer opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The girl wasn't angry, just confused, sad, like the world suddenly didn't make sense anymore. Her mom tried to gather her words. We try our best, sweetie. Sometimes, when animals are really sick or really old and there's no space." Lila interrupted, voice steady but small. "Then I want to be the one who wants him." It didn't sound like a demand. It sounded like a promise. Silence again. You could hear the distant sound of laughter from the other side of the shelter. Someone had just adopted a puppy. A cheer went up. But here, in this quiet corner, something deeper was happening. The volunteer knelt beside her. "Honey," she said gently, "it's not that easy. He needs special care. He might never walk right again. He may never even play. We don't know if he'll ever be happy." Lila turned her eyes back to Rusty. "He just needs someone to stay. Everyone else leaves." The weight of those words, too heavy for a 7-year-old, too raw for anyone to ignore. Rusty's eyes flickered, very slowly, barely noticeable, but Lila saw. She smiled, almost as if she was expecting it. Then, she did something unexpected. She pushed her stuffed dog through the bars, letting it land gently beside Rusty. "This is Henry," she whispered. "He's been with me since I was a baby. He'll stay with you, okay?" Rusty didn't move, but an hour later, when they checked again, the stuffed dog was tucked under Rusty's chin. Lila came back the next day, and the next. Each time she sat, talked, waited, brought pieces of treats, drawings she'd made, even a recording of her singing lullabies that she asked the staff to play when she wasn't there. And slowly, ever so slowly, Rusty changed. The first time he lifted his head, she gasped. Not loudly, just a small, delighted sound that lit up the room. Then came the tail twitch, a soft wag once, then again. One morning, a volunteer walked in and found Rusty standing, wobbly, shaking, but standing. His eyes weren't vacant anymore. They were following movement, watching for a small girl with a ponytail and a bag full of hope. And on the 5th visit, something happened that no one expected. Rusty barked, just once, a short, rusty sound. How fitting, like an old engine trying to turn over. But it was real. It was him. Lila cried, hugged the bars and said, "I knew you could." The shelter staff watched with stunned faces. A dog they had nearly given up on, choosing to fight again. Because of her. It wasn't long before the staff called a meeting. They'd seen transformations, miracles even. But this was different. This was the result of something most dogs never get. Unconditional patience. A child's kind of love. The kind that doesn't calculate effort. It just gives. The shelter director, a woman who'd been working with animals for over 2 decades, quietly said, "We need to talk to her parents." What followed was even more unexpected. Lila's parents didn't say no. They didn't rush the decision. They asked questions, talked to vets, made a space at home, and 3 weeks later, the adoption papers were signed. Rusty had a home, his own bed, his own bowl, his own little girl, who still tucked Henry beside him every night. And every morning, he'd limp to her bedroom door, wait until she opened it, and wag his tail, not just once, but again and again, because Rusty wasn't broken. He was healing, and all it took was someone choosing to want him when no one else would. The weeks after Lila's decision were not easy. Rusty was different, yes, more alert, more aware, but the old dog still had a long way to go. His body was broken in ways no amount of love or care could fix. His joints were stiff, and his legs were weak. Some days, he would lie on the floor, eyes distant, as though lost in the memories of his past life, before the shelter, before Lila. But there was something in his spirit that had been reignited. It happened slowly at first. The mornings were the hardest for Rusty, waking up stiff and sore, struggling to lift his head. But every morning, without fail, Lila was there. She didn't rush him. She didn't make him move faster than he could. She simply sat with him, her tiny hand resting gently on his fur, talking softly, telling him about her day, her dreams, the little things that filled her heart. But then came the turning point. It wasn't a huge, dramatic moment. It wasn't a miracle cure. It was something much quieter, something more intimate. One chilly morning, as the light of dawn broke through the curtains and filtered across the hardwood floor, Rusty lay on his bed, staring at the door. His legs twitched involuntarily, but he didn't get up. Lila had already dressed herself, packed her bag, and was walking toward him, as usual. But that day, something felt different. Something in the air told her that it was time. It was time for Rusty to take the next step. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about strength and courage. Lila knelt beside him, holding out her hand. "Come on, Rusty," she said softly. "Let's go outside." Rusty's eyes flickered toward her, and for a moment, Lila thought he might not move. But she saw something in him. A spark, a small, fleeting glimmer. The first real sign of life she had seen in him that wasn't brought on by food or treats. It was a spark of trust, a spark of hope. Lila gently coaxed him, offering her hand and her quiet, unwavering faith. "I know you can do it," she whispered. "You're not broken. You just need to take the first step." Rusty hesitated. The world outside that door seemed so distant, so far away. But then, in a moment that felt like both a lifetime and an instant, Rusty's front legs trembled. His paws dug into the soft carpet, and with great effort, he lifted his chest. His back legs dragged, but he was moving. He was trying. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she watched him struggle and fight, watched him do the impossible. She wasn't sure how long it took, minutes, an hour, but in the end, Rusty was standing. His legs were shaky, his body unsteady, but he was standing, and for the first time in a long time, he looked up at Lila. His eyes, once empty, were now full of something new, a flicker of recognition, a flicker of love. Lila's heart swelled, and tears pricked at her eyes. She knew that this was the moment they had both been waiting for. This was the moment that proved Rusty wasn't broken. This was the moment that proved no soul was beyond saving. "Good boy, Rusty," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Good boy." But the real test came moments later. Lila opened the door, and the cold air of the morning rushed in, filling the room with the smell of the world outside. Fresh grass, dew on the ground, the distant sound of birds singing. Rusty blinked, hesitating. His legs were still weak, but there was something about the outdoors that called to him, something that had been dormant inside him for so long. He took a step forward, and then another, and then, for the first time in what felt like forever, Rusty began to walk, slowly at first, unsure, but steadily. With each step, his confidence grew. He was still limping, his body stiff, but he was walking, he was moving, he was alive. Lila, tears streaming down her face, cheered him on. "You're doing it, Rusty. You're doing it." The dog didn't look back. He was focused on the path ahead of him, determined. Every muscle in his body screamed with the effort, but he didn't stop. Not this time. Not when he had something to live for. The moment was magical, surreal. Time seemed to stretch and bend as Lila walked beside him, supporting him, encouraging him, telling him how proud she was of him. But it wasn't just about the physical journey. This was a journey of the heart. For Rusty, it was the first time he had felt truly cared for, truly wanted. It was the first time he had been treated like he mattered. And for Lila, it was the first time she had seen her promise to him come to life. She had chosen him when no one else did. She had believed in him when the world had turned its back on him. And now, here they were, walking together, Rusty and Lila, two souls who had found each other against all odds. But then came the moment that would change everything. As they reached the end of the yard, Rusty paused, his eyes narrowed slightly, his ears flicking as if he had heard something distant. Lila stopped too, sensing his hesitation. "Rusty," she asked softly, unsure of what was happening. "What's wrong?" Rusty stood still, every muscle tense. For a moment, nothing happened. The world was still, silent, and then there it was, the sound of an approaching car. Rusty's body stiffened, his legs trembled, and his eyes grew wide with fear. Lila's heart stopped. It was the car that had driven him to the shelter, the car that had left him there, abandoned, forgotten, the car that had marked the beginning of his isolation. Rusty's body shook. He lowered his head, his tail between his legs, and Lila watched in horror as he started to back away. "No, Rusty, no!" Lila cried out, rushing to his side. She grabbed his collar, her voice shaking. "It's okay, Rusty. It's not the same. It's not the same anymore." But Rusty couldn't hear her. His mind was trapped in the past, locked in a memory of abandonment and pain. The car, the sound, the fear, it all rushed back in an instant. Lila's heart broke. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about getting Rusty to walk. This was about giving him the courage to let go of the past and embrace the future. She dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands on his trembling body. She looked him in the eyes, deep, soft, gentle eyes, and said the words she had been holding inside. "You're not alone, Rusty. I'm not going anywhere. I won't leave you." The words hung in the air, fragile and delicate, but for Rusty, they were everything. Slowly, ever so slowly, he raised his head. His trembling ceased. His eyes softened, and then, slowly, he took a step forward. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was the most important. With Lila by his side, guiding him, he took another step, and another, and another. By the time the car passed by, Rusty was standing tall. He was walking on his own. His steps weren't perfect, but they were his, and they were full of strength. Lila beamed at him, her heart overflowing with love. "You did it," she whispered, and for the first time in his life, Rusty realized something. He wasn't broken. He was healing, and he had a reason to keep going. Lila had saved him, not just with her love, but with her belief in him. She had given him the strength to face the past and the courage to walk toward the future. Together, they had proven that love could heal even the most broken of souls, and as they walked side by side, there was no question in either of their minds. This was only the beginning of their journey. The journey that Lila and Rusty had taken together was not just about a dog and a girl. It was about resilience. It was about love, the kind of love that doesn't expect anything in return, the kind of love that holds you through your darkest moments and believes in you when you can no longer believe in yourself. It was a journey of healing, not just for Rusty, but for Lila too. In the days that followed Rusty's first steps outside, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. It wasn't just his physical strength that improved, it was his heart. He started to trust again. He would look up at Lila with his big, soulful eyes, and for the first time in years, he seemed to smile, just the slightest twitch of his lips. He was learning to play again, albeit gently. Sometimes he would lie in the grass, letting the sun warm his body, his eyes closed in contentment. And Lila, she was always there, always by his side, quietly supporting him, never rushing him. She gave him time, and in doing so, she gave him his life back. It wasn't long before the shelter staff began to notice the change too. The volunteers, who had once seen Rusty as just another old dog with no chance of finding a home, began to see him in a new light. He wasn't just a broken dog who had been abandoned. He was Rusty, the dog who had found a second chance at life. The shelter's director, a woman who had spent years caring for countless animals, watched the bond between Lila and Rusty grow with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had seen many adoptions, many happy endings, but there was something about this one that was different. It was as if they had become two halves of the same soul, and their connection was undeniable. "I've never seen anything like this before," the director remarked one morning as she observed Lila and Rusty walking together in the yard. "That dog is happier than I've ever seen him." Lila smiled softly, her eyes glistening with a quiet joy. "He's not just happier," she said, her voice gentle but certain. "He's alive." For the first time in her life, Lila understood what it meant to be a caregiver, to love someone or something without expecting anything in return. She had learned that sometimes love isn't about the grand gestures or the big moments. Sometimes it's about the quiet hours spent sitting next to someone who needs you. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. It's about being there for someone when they can't stand on their own and offering them the strength to get back up. But even as Rusty's spirit healed, the real test came when the time came for the shelter's next adoption event. It was meant to be a happy occasion, a chance for families to find their new companions. But for Rusty, the event brought with it a deep uncertainty. Would anyone want him? Would anyone see him for the dog he had become? Or would they see only the dog who was broken in so many ways? Lila had her doubts, but she didn't let them show. She refused to let Rusty believe he wasn't worthy of love. She refused to let him think he wasn't enough. On the day of the event, the shelter was filled with families, parents with children, excitedly talking about the dogs they hoped to meet. The air was thick with the sound of laughter and chatter, but Lila's focus was solely on Rusty. She sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his fur, whispering softly to him. "Today's the day, Rusty," she said with a quiet confidence that belied her nervousness. "Today's the day you find your family." But as the hours passed and people came and went, there was no one who seemed interested in Rusty. They looked at the younger, healthier dogs. They smiled at the playful puppies, the ones with energy, the ones who could run and jump and play. Rusty, old, stiff, and slow, was left largely ignored in his corner. Lila watched, her heart sinking, but she didn't give up. She wouldn't. Then, just as the event was winding down, a couple walked into the shelter. They were older, around Lila's parents' age. Their faces were kind, but their eyes showed a weariness that spoke of years of experience. They walked through the aisles of cages, looking at each animal, but Lila's eyes were on them. She watched as they passed by the younger dogs, their eyes lingering on a few, but quickly moving on. They were looking for something more, something deeper. And then, without saying a word, they stopped in front of Rusty's kennel. Lila's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The man knelt down to Rusty's level, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The noise of the shelter, the bustling crowds, the chatter, it all faded away. It was just the man and the dog. He reached through the bars of the kennel and gently touched Rusty's head. Rusty looked up at him with those soulful eyes, as if he recognized something in the man. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet, deep connection. The woman, standing behind her husband, looked at Lila and smiled softly. "He's beautiful," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Lila smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. He's been through a lot, but he's ready for a family. He just needs someone who believes in him." The couple exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew that Rusty wasn't perfect, that he might never be the same dog he once was. But they also knew that he was worth loving. He had been through so much, and yet, here he was, still capable of love, still capable of joy, still capable of trust. "We'll take him," the woman said, her voice filled with certainty. "We'll take him home." And in that moment, everything changed. Lila's heart soared. She felt as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. Rusty, the dog who had been cast aside, abandoned, broken, he had found his home. He had found his people. As the couple signed the adoption papers and prepared to take Rusty home, Lila knelt down beside him. She hugged him tightly, whispering in his ear, "You did it. You're going to be okay. You're not alone anymore." Rusty, looking up at her with his big, thankful eyes, gave a small, contented sigh. He had finally found the love and safety he had been searching for. And for Lila, that was all that mattered. When they left, Lila stood by the door, watching them walk away. Rusty looked back at her one last time, and in that moment, it felt as though time had stopped. The bond they had shared, deep and unbreakable, would remain in her heart forever. But it was time for him to move forward. It was time for him to live the life he had always deserved. And as Lila walked away, a soft smile graced her lips. She knew that Rusty was going to be okay. He had found his home, his family, and his purpose. And now, he would have the life he had always dreamed of. It wasn't just a happy ending. It was a beginning for Rusty, and a beginning for Lila. For in saving him, Lila had saved herself too. She had learned the true meaning of love, the kind that doesn't expect anything in return, the kind that is unconditional. And as for Rusty, he was no longer the broken dog. He was whole again, and he had Lila to thank for that. Watch the next story. It might just change how you see everything.